Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay, I gotta go. I love you too. Bye.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. We're going to call the meeting to order. We don't quite have a quorum. We're expecting our quorum to show up at any time now. We're going to run a little late today. So, but welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. We will go through quickly the review of the agenda. We have honoring a former member of our commission we started out with, and then we'll have public comments where Scott will lead, and then we'll go to commissioners' comments. Depending on when our quorum member shows up, we might hold off on the review and approve the minutes. We'll have Captain Kevin Carr and company come up and do the community justice update. Then we'll talk about some talking points and discuss those if we want to come up with some from the commission. The chief's report, and then we'll talk about the Taser Policy and review of the OC, because I'm not going to be able to say what the actual name is of the aerosol. And then Scott will give us a community update, an outreach update before we end the meeting. So with that, Claire, thank you for coming back.
Sure.
We appreciate all your hard work for the years that you attended the commission, and the chief is going to take it and present you with our
Very
thanks
nice.
and appreciation.
Well, Claire, it is absolutely my privilege and my honor to present you with this certificate of appreciation. You'll notice it's a little different than what we've done before, because how many years are we honoring, Jeremy?
She has been here 7 years.
7 years
Wow.
worth of working with this commission.
She's been with the commission a long time.
And I think one of the things that I would say, even though I've only been here for 5 months, about 7 years worth of work is being so instrumental in a leadership capacity to move this organization forward to the professional agency it is. And we just can't do that without thoughtful and considerate leaders like you. And so the challenge coin is here twice, front and back for
Wow.
you to be able to have.
That's
And then
awesome.
and the certificate. So thank you so much for 7 years
Thank you.
of commitment and dedication to what we do.
Well, it's certainly my privilege to serve on this commission. I think it does very important work. And I know Councilor Zelinka and Councilor Ye will continue to serve as well as I did. I'm just sorry I won't be here to wordsmith that Taser Policy.
I was disappointed to hear that you weren't
and
going
make
to
it
be here
even
today.
better.
I'll call you.
Yeah. So, and I'm also sorry I won't get to serve with you further, Chief Skinner. So I'm excited about your tenure.
Well, what the fun part about it is that we're going to stay so connected over the next years that I'm here that you'll live vicariously through me into
That's
into this
right.
commission. So that'd be perfect.
All right.
And not
well-
wasting any time, Claire. There you go.
Hey, there you go. And with that, I will let you guys get on to business.
Thank you very
So
much.
thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for all
Thank
the
you.
work.
Good job, Claire.
Thanks, Jeremy. Take care.
With that, we'll move to Scott with the public comments, and I'll turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you. So if there's anyone that wants to make public comments, we have the blue forms in the back. We'll need you to complete those and then bring those up. In the meantime, everyone that wishes to speak will have 3 minutes. At the 22nd, we'll hold up a sign notifying you they have 20 seconds left, and then we'll stop at 3 minutes. So we have Janet Zoll. If you want to come up here.
Good evening.
Would you like to come join us at the table here? So.
Camera will pick you up a little bit better.
My name's Janet Zoll, and I live in Eugene in the River Road area in Miss Surratt's ward. And from as long as I've lived in Eugene, I've been concerned about and advocating for the homeless. And the current situation has me really concerned. I was delighted when I heard the Ninth Circuit Court ruling. And almost as immediately as I was delighted, I was devastated by the fact that Eugene believes that they are in compliance and we're doing business as usual. I just drove by Chambers Street where there's a camp set up over the last few days. And there are signs posted all along there, and the people are moving out with nowhere to go. And that makes me so sad, because the problem is going to get worse. It's not going to get better. People are losing their homes every day because of no-cause evictions. I know a number of my friends who fall into that category. They have no place to go. They're going to be out on the streets. And I think that homeless people, many of them are getting a bum rush, a bum deal, a bum rap, I'm sorry, that they are all being classified as deadbeats and tweakers and retrobates and the low-life scum of the earth, when that is not true. There's a small portion of that's true about them, but it's not true about all of them. I've been out on the streets feeding people since 2000. I was very involved with the Hours Camp. I helped them move 35 times in 1 year. I provided food for them. They left every site they ever lived. They left it cleaner than they found it. And it broke my heart when they were just hounded so much that they had to disband and give up their fight for equal rights for homeless people. So I encourage all of you to think about how we're going to move forward, because as I see it, it's getting worse every day. And I don't see any let up in the future unless somebody does something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the only one I had so far. Is there any others? Anybody else want to address the commission? Turn back over to you, Bill.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll go around the table with commissioners' comments. Kyle, we'll start with you if there's anything you'd like to add.
Sure, just a couple of quick little things. Just a little update on the drone stuff. I met with the Portland area work group that includes, actually it's kind of based out of Portland currently, but it's we're looking to try to make it statewide. There were 9 police agencies represented from Clark County, Washington State Police, Portland areas, Bend, and Eugene. So a group of agencies that are all looking to, we're looking to get together and train quarterly together, and then trying to fold in as many other agencies from the state so that we can all be making sure that we're doing best practices and have other agencies to lean on for questions, support, assistance, and make sure that we're all doing the right thing to make sure that we keep moving in a positive direction. And then from the city side, that's moving forward. We met today with the sub-policy group that's been working on the city APM policy and operations manual.
APM.
Well, yeah, APM document.
What does that mean?
Oh, Administrative Procedures Manual.
Okay.
The city's policy manual, essentially. And so we're on a...
Okay, no acronyms. Not yet. For at least one meeting. Tune in.
Yeah, it's the city's policy manual for all the departments. And so we've got kind of steps forward for moving that angle of things forward. So we're slowly paving the way forward, keeping everybody on the same page, and it's coming along nicely. So.
I didn't remember your name, I'm sorry. Janet. Too often we hear public comment that is not like your own. And I want to say that I personally am grateful for the work that you've been doing with the homeless and the homeless issue. And I know that Christian scripture says that what you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. And too often we forget about that. And too often we go by people that are homeless and we don't pay attention to them. Having been homeless at one point in my own personal life with a family, I know the difficulties that it gives a person. And so I want to thank you for doing the work that you've been doing and for bringing that up to our body here. It's good to know that there are still people out there that care. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Marty?
Yes, thank you for your comments. It really is a catch-22. No police officer I've ever talked to ever wants to arrest somebody for being homeless. What we deal with is the fact that we have a lot of complaint-based enforcement, so people are complaining about somebody doing something they're not supposed to. The good news is we do not attempt to punish homelessness with imprisonment here. As you said, the flip side is, what good does a fine do? We know that policing is, the least efficient way and effective way of dealing with homelessness, but as my friend Alan said, we're working on a number of projects. I think 31 was what I heard you say once. The silver bullet, but the silver buckshot is what we say. That we're trying a lot of different things to see what is effective here and what addresses the problem in a more humane and thoughtful way. I know there is a lot of work going on that subject, and I hope we're making progress there as well. So, certainly your words have been heard and taken to heart by a lot of the police too. Thank you.
Yeah, well, he stole my thunder. It is a very complicated issue, and it's very homelessness and what to do with it. Right now, one of the bigger issues in my ward is the area around the Whitebird Clinic, and what do you do about that, and how do we deal with it? And it's everybody who's right there wants us to solve that problem for them right then and there, and then you say, okay, well, we're not solving homelessness. What are we supposed to do with these people? And I don't know, but get them out of here, and that just goes so far, right? And it doesn't really solve the problem. But I understand the frustration with people who are on the other end of that, as well as the people who are homeless. That's very, very difficult. On being new to the commission, I met with these two gentlemen, gave me my orientation, and so I'm well oriented and anxious to go to work on the police commission issues. Big shoes to fill with Claire's shoes to fill, but I'll do my best and dive in on the issues. And I think I'll be a sponge for a while, though. And as long as you don't use too many acronyms, I'll try to follow along.
Well, welcome, Magellan Study. And I will draw contention to one thing you said. I live right next to Whitebird, and I don't think all of us want them gone. At least my roommates and I
guess somebody
don't
need you to call.
yeah, I need to call everybody. No, a lot of the property owners are very adamant and vocal about it. But I think we've all covered that. As far as the camera thing, which we brought up 2 months ago, I've heard broad community support about the idea. People already feel, if not safer downtown, they feel the police presence a little bit more. They feel like somebody's there, and at least more responsive in the downtown area. I've heard about camp busting being a concern as well from a variety of folks. And I would be interested at some point in reviewing the other side of the complaint-based enforcement, just looking at when and where we intervene with those camps. But yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Terry?
At the Jefferson meeting, and they had a potluck recently, so at 2 different times, the concerns that I was hearing about this issue that you brought up is they were all in support of and trying to figure out some of the solutions, and the idea of it being buckshot, of course, is the only way to approach it. There can't, and I think a lot of people wait for that. They want to find a solution, and since that's not possible, then they get stalled out that we can't solve everything. But underlying, or the underpinning of part of this is the ferocious rise in rents here and sale of homes, and that has driven things to where you have to make, I think that said $24 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And of course, as we all know, that's not happening either. So there's another arm of that problem that needs to be addressed, because it's not just the people who are getting out of their homes. We need to address why they're losing their homes, and the eviction, the no-cause eviction, those kinds of things. That's legislative. I mean, that needs to be addressed, and that's not our purview, but it is something that we do hear about a lot. So.
Thanks. Chief?
So I'll have an opportunity to come back around during my comments, and I'll talk about something a little bit different. But for this particular portion, I will let you know that we're on schedule to receive cameras on October 8th. Lieutenant Doug Mozan, who was heading this up for us, I actually spent the money and sent him to the manufacturer to watch them be built and get some training. And it's such a tremendous investment. We want to make sure that we have every opportunity to understand the capabilities and the best way to leverage the technology. Polk County has the exact same camera platform, and so we're going to do some training up there and really learn how to use it and make sure that we know what we're doing when they arrive. And so we're looking forward to a strategic plan on how we deploy those. Kind of finishing the conversation about public comments. Last night I spent 2 hours with the Whitaker Community Council around this issue, and my meeting right before this was an hour with 20 people from Councilor Zelenka's ward that live in and around the 12th and Mill area, voicing their concerns. And so the challenge that we continue to see is the kind of this tipping point between two perspectives on how the police department should be dealing with this. And I'm very, very quick to push back and say that this is not solely a police department issue, even though that oftentimes we're pushed front and center on this. These are policy decisions and resource decisions that far exceed our capacity to be able to either affect change or to be able to deal with. And you will, if you've heard me speak throughout the summer and since I've been here, I'm very, very quick to mention that if we are going to tell people that they can't sleep and or camp in a certain location, we need to have the alternative for them. And our police officers desperately want to be able to say, if not here, then this is where you can go. And so we are really in support of the city's efforts right now as they continue and embark on and continue down a path of looking for those alternatives. And so this is not something that the police department has ever proposed that we can enforce our way out of, nor do we want to spend our time enforcing these particular issues that are violations under our ordinance, and much rather have my police officers dealing with life safety issues and having police officers deal with what police officers should be dealing with. And so we're working on that balance and working really, really closely with the city, and are hoping to come to council this month and the next month and deliver some really good information about kind of a path forward on how we build capacity to be able to deal with these issues.
Welcome, Councilor Zelenka. Looking forward to working with you again.
Yep.
Great seeing everyone after the break, and looking forward to our work this fall. I was going to make some comments around the community justice piece, but since we're going to be covering that today, there are more questions and how we might play a role, so I'm going to hold off until after that presentation.
Welcome, Al. We appreciate that you're joining the commission, and I'm sure you'll add a lot to it, and so thank you for coming. You know, this homeless issue, as everybody's talked about around the table, is a very difficult and complex, and the commission at one point 3 or 4 years ago took on the homeless, and we actually spent about 6 months bringing in experts to talk and give us some ideas, and the police department some ideas. And the conclusion came after all of that was that we had no answers, which is sad to think that that's what happens with most of these things, because there's two sides to this issue, that it's just a very difficult one. So it would be something that I think that maybe the commission might want to look at again and maybe try to have some other outcomes to help along with this process as the rest of the city goes through it. But it is, as a commissioner at that time, it was a little disappointing to go through all that work and actually have nothing that we could offer as help to both the city and the department. So with that, we will move on.
Can I ask a question? Is my police commissioner wearing a pig tie?
Flying pig tie.
Okay, just checking to see.
When pigs fly.
When certain policies get approved, that's when
Okay, I
pigs
was
fly.
just checking.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to comment that Jennifer Ye at yesterday's
Yeah, I'm getting better.
I think that's going around right now. So with that, we'll move to review and approve of the minutes. If anybody has any comments on the minutes, let me know. If not, we would look for a motion.
I have a comment, and that's that I put Mr. Silver throughout the packet instead of Mr. Mobert, and he was very kind to tell me that he wasn't going to say that or make that observation, but I made that mistake, and I will be fixing that in the minutes if that's okay.
I haven't been Mr. Silver since Bible college and helping with the youth, so.
You can
Thank
call him
you
Mr.
for-
Jeremy if you want.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Other than that, then I'd look for a motion.
Move to approve the minutes.
Have a first and a second. Any other discussion? All those that are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those against, say aye. Aye. Perfect. Then we will move on, and we'll invite Captain Campcar and group to join us to talk about the meeting update.
I brought lots of reading materials.
Coming prepared, I like that.
So I understand that I have 30 minutes. That includes time for questions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to be brief. As the chief can tell you, that I could probably talk about this for hours because I've been living and breathing this project for the past few months.
I'm so tired of you right now.
I love you, but I'm really tired of you.
Yes. So some of you may have already seen this case. I did a coverage of the video that just got published last night, but in case you all haven't, I'd like to start out with that. It's only about 2 to 3 minutes.
I saw it on.
You saw it?
Yep.
Okay.
It was well done.
And so we'll
Except for
start
the guy
with
who's
that.
narrating most of the time.
Yes, yes.
Over the last 5 years, Eugene's population has grown, and so has our community safety needs. While we've tried many creative programs to try and maximize the resources we have, the truth is, the need is just outpacing our capacity to meet the growing needs of this community. Over the last 4 years, calls to our 911 center have increased 21%. At the same time, police and 911 staffing has remained relatively flat.
Folks who have probably had their worst nightmare, like their house has gotten broken into, their child's been hurt by someone. Maybe that's not an in-progress situation, but for them, that's their worst day, and we need to be there for them. But we are finding that we are not able to do that in a timely fashion at all.
On average, the time it takes for an officer to respond has increased by almost 20 minutes. While urgent, life-threatening calls are prioritized. Other calls that impact our community's quality of life often hold until officers are available to respond.
And have a lot of activity going on that you don't know about or uncertain about and have concerns about. And then you call the police and there's no response. What do? I've come to find out that they just do not have the personnel in order to be able to come to these, we'll call it lower risk kinds of situations, but they still remain public safety issues in our community.
Police are unable to respond to 1 out of 3 calls due to lack of patrol resources.
And we can see the people who are frustrated on their end, on their side of the call, saying they're not responding, I'm not going to call, or I don't want to talk to them anymore. At the same time, it's not because we don't want to go there, it's because we have such few resources to be able to meet all of the demands that are being asked of us.
Our Fire and Emergency Medical Service, EMS, faces a similar problem. Many of the calls to our fire and EMS are for people experiencing chronic conditions who need ongoing care or help. But without resources, they are forced to rely on emergency services. This means it can take longer for the fire and EMS to respond to people experiencing life-threatening medical emergencies, those with chest pain, cardiac arrest, stroke, trauma, breathing, and sepsis. Many creative programs have been applied to this problem to maximize resources and meet community need. Programs like Community Outreach and Response Team, and Cahoots work to connect people in crisis with appropriate services and reduce the need for costly emergency response or law enforcement intervention. Many of these programs, however, have limited capacity and funding. A long-term solution is still needed. As our needs grow with our community, it is important that we acknowledge and attend to these trends in order to preserve the safety and livability of Eugene. To learn more about community safety, what we've done and what's next, visit the City of Eugene's website and follow the link to community safety.
I'll get the light. Well, I've watched this video about half dozen times now, and two things occur to me. One is that our chief has an incredible radio voice, and so for what it's worth.
It only took me like 9,000 takes to do that.
To try to do that.
Yeah.
Face for radio?
What's that?
A face for radio?
That's
Yeah,
right,
face for
radio. This last Sunday, I had a conversation with one of our patrol officers, senior patrol officers, who came to me and he knew that I was the lead for this project for EPD, and what he shared with me really broke my heart. And just in summary, he was telling me about how he says, Captain, I'm just exhausted. He says, every day I come to work and I try to do the best job that I can possibly do. And he says, I'm going call after call after call and after call. And he says, I don't have time to just take a simple break to get my lunch. And he said, last week I got home. He says, when he got home, his family, they were sitting at the table with all, his kids and wife and all of that. And he says he couldn't eat dinner because his stomach was all churned up, and it just so much adrenaline from going from one place to the next and what have you. So I mentioned that because a lot of what we're talking about is our service delivery and what we try to do for the community and what have you, and the objectives that we're trying to meet. And I don't want to lose perspective or focus of how our lack of staffing and what's happened in our organization for as long as we've all been around is really affecting the health and the well-being of the very same people that are trying to deliver those services. And that's what gives the chief and all of you, more energy to be able to get behind this project and push it forward. So my hat's off to you for taking this on. So the community justice purpose. In summary, the premise behind this is for us to be able to address some of the short, midterm, as well as long-term needs of the gaps of the public safety system. And you notice I said public safety and I didn't say police department. And I talked to the officers about that. Chief does the same thing in that when we're talking about the public safety, the municipal public safety, we're not talking just about EPD. As selfish as I may be, or I ought to be, it's a much bigger system than that. So we're talking about the court, the needs of our municipal court, our judges, public defender's office, prosecutors, jail space, and all of that. As a result of all of this, sometime back in the latter part of May, a functional team was put together. And this team consists of representatives from the police department, and I happen to be the representative for EPD, representative from the court, the prevention, homelessness, and social services. And we were given a set of objectives, but ultimately our goal, what we were asked to do was to work together individually and also as a team over the course of the next few months to come up with some investment packages that we could ultimately take before the council. Now, these, in order to build these investment packages, we were given some specific desired outcomes, and I think these are probably very dear to Scott's heart, because I know you like KPIs and desired outcomes and what have you. And essentially, these were derived from the council work session, as I understand, the input from exec team and others. And it broke down into 4 specific categories. How do we build trust with the community? How do we increase safety? As part of this, how do we focus on prevention? And then last but not least, strengthen partnership with internally and externally. And then each of these higher level objectives, we identified 3 specific key performance indicators to try to see how we can measure essentially what it is that we're inputting into the system. For example, when we talk about building trust with the community, one of the ways for us to measure that or to try to aim for is to say we want to try to reduce calls that are going without response time. You heard the chief talk about that. Resolving cases. You've probably heard from various sources how our detectives, for example, some of them have as many as 70 to 75 cases that are sitting on their desks. These are victims that are just waiting for somebody to give them a call and say, hey, we're working on that. Our response time, and so on. So we used all of that, and each of us went to work individually within our own respective departments and to work on these things. So the process that I used internally varied a little bit differently because the sheer size of EPD, being the largest stakeholder in this endeavor. I put together a team of representatives from across the organization, Communication Center 911, our operations support, investigations, detective patrol, and what have you. And we basically have been spending the past couple of months or so trying to look at what we need. And what I mean by that is that we were tasked with looking at or developing packages that are based on what we call patch. How do we patch the system for EPD initially? And then how do we patch and repair it, which is sort of midterm response? And then how do we patch, repair, and build the system, which is sort of the ideal world, if you were to look at it from that perspective. We started out with looking at the Magellan Study that was done back in 2006, and some of you are familiar with that. And since that study is 12 years old, we wanted to make sure that what it is that we produce is scientific, it's defendable, something that we can talk about with a great deal of confidence. And so the first thing that we wanted to go do is, well, let's get a consultant from outside. Well, consultants cost a lot of money, and secondly, people that we reached out to, they had about roughly an 18 months turnaround time. Well, we don't have 18 months to deal with this thing. So what we did is we tapped into our existing resources. We have some very capable, bright, smart people that work in our department with high-level educations, such as our folks from our crime analysis unit and what have you. So one of our crime analysts, James Hadley, and one of our lieutenants went out to a different state where they studied under one of the consultants and learned about how it is that this particular consultant that uses a nationally accepted system to look at patrol allocation, to be able to use that, and then they brought that model and they applied that locally for us. And they managed to do that in a very short period of time. I was pretty impressed with that. And I don't have a whole lot of time here, just for the sake of time, to dive into that study. It's called Patrol Allocation Model. And essentially what that is, it's based on a theory that patrol has to have a minimum number of police officers to be able to meet the public demand. That's essentially the gist of what patrol allocation model is. And what we learned out of that was that based on our current call load, what's coming in, what's on our plate on a day-to-day basis, just for our patrol officers, I'm not talking about our investigations, our detectives, or what have you. In order for us to just patch the system, which means plug the holes so the boat is not sinking, just to patch the system, we need 17 police officers today on top of the existing resources, provided that we're at full staffing, okay? Which we're not. Now, if we want to patch and repair the system, the model said that we need 50 officers, additional patrol officers. If we want to have an ideal police department, an ideal police department is a police department where truly proactive, we're doing community policing work, which you've heard the chief talk about, but we're getting out and we're building trust with the community. We're being proactive. We need 115 patrol officers. So 1750 and 115. So when I compared those numbers to the Magellan Study, which came out 12 years ago, back in 2006, Magellan did a study similar to that. And what they said 12 years ago, based on our population back then, was that we needed 33 more officers at the onset, and 114 to be able to have community policing. So the numbers are fairly the same, broken down a little bit differently. So we took that, as well as looking at building some other models that we worked with, and then a few weeks ago, once I had the recommendation of the department, then I had a chance to take that to the larger group, which was the steering committee, which is made up of police, fire, EMS, some of the other stakeholders that I was talking about in terms of the public safety umbrella. And then once we put it all together, we were like, whoa, the system is in real trouble, because it's not just EPD that's in a world of hurt. Everybody else is in a world of hurt. So we had to go through this awesome task of trying to figure out, how do we simonize this? How do we bring the costs down? Where can we cut and just go through that exercise? And we did that, and now we're going through this process, and some of you are members of the subcommittee, where this is going to the council subcommittee, and then eventually it's going to work its way up through the exec team, and eventually on September 26th, it'll go before the council for their consideration. That's been this is how we've come to where we're at under the community justice part. Now, while this has been happening, we've also launched a public outreach initiative, which involves members from both the city manager's office as well as our own public information director, Melinda McLaughlin, and who's been helping me try to communicate internally with the department, because our officers want to know what's going on. You know, what are you doing, Chief? What are you doing about this? And then also externally, and the example of the video that you saw is a small portion of what's been going on in terms of our external communication. And if I can ask Melinda maybe to come up and talk a little bit more about our communication plan.
Her talk about the survey.
Thanks.
Well, good evening. Hi. So it's a monumental task to have some information and then trying to deliver it to all of Eugene so that everybody has the basics of where the public safety is at this point, where the community justice system is. So one of the first things we did is we gathered together a multidisciplinary team made up of city manager's office, police, fire, courts. We've got some social media experts from library and recreation. We have a bunch of folks together who do work within the city, who do public information, that have come together. And one of the first things we did, is you see a little bit of the result here, is we made what's called an elevator speech, which give over maybe 30 seconds that you have on an elevator, and we're hoping it's a skyscraper, because as you see, there's a flip side to the handout that you got. There's a lot of information to deliver, but what we are continuing to do is refine the message and refine what we think people would want to know first, and then also have the background of information of what's behind that. If they ask questions, we can answer their questions. The information that we're looking at right now is just straight public information. It's trying to get people up to speed with where we are, and so it's an information campaign. We have done handouts, flyers. We've got a website. There was a survey that was done by the city of Eugene with a guy named Man Ross, and so we took that and created a website version for that. That's not a scientific survey. I'll have her talk a little bit more about it, but it is a way for people to engage, give us information that we might not find in a traditional survey. We'll get a lot more verbatim type answers, a lot more people's top of consciousness. So we've got the website, and we have done some earned media outreach. So we've gone to the TV stations and said, here's what's going on. Can you do a story about it? And we've had most of them do it at this point. The Register Guard, I think KMTR, KVAL, and KEZI have all done it. When they do these stories, then we're sharing it out on social media as well and getting more eyes on it. And then when we have something like that we've shared, we wait till a Friday when social media people are looking at their social media. They have more discretionary time, and then we're boosting it with some ad dollars, a very, very small amount. So you can get up to 70,000 people looking at the story. And some people will stay on it longer, some people will share it. You're looking for the engagement. In addition to that, people like the chief of police and the fire chief and judge are going out and speaking at about 11 different very large community events. They would be like the League of Women Voters, Chamber of Commerce, greeters, and just a whole host of different groups, Rotaries, and we have a list of those. And then we've gone out to about 14 different community events that were already happening, Party in the Park, and we've been to all of the wards throughout the city. And we have, through that, also had a little mini survey so people could engage with a map. And so I'm going to turn it over to Laura to talk about the survey portion.
Sure. So hi, my name is Laura Hammond, and I'm with the city manager's office. So we did have some great response to our online survey. We just closed it on Monday, and we had 2,478 responses, which is pretty significant for an online survey for the city of Eugene, I would say. So we're excited to start analyzing that information and bring that back to council on the 26th. We also, when we were out in the community just talking to people as a way to engage them, we had a map, and we just were like, so tell us how safe you feel in your neighborhood. And it was a sticker exercise where they got a green, yellow, or red. And so they got to stick it, green being they felt pretty safe in their neighborhood, or yellow, maybe less so, or red. And so we have a bit of a heat map in that sense. We combined all 400 of those dots that we collected over the summer. So we'll be able to show that too. It's not scientific, but I think it adds a little bit more information to the information we've already gathered. And we did get a lot of feedback through the open-ended questions on the survey that I think will be really interesting and helpful as we move forward. So yeah, we'll be kind of summarizing that information and bringing it back to council to help kind of provide greater depth and a little bit more broad representation to the data we already have.
So we're going to turn this back over to the chief because he's been out in so many different community venues with our talking points, and he's going to give you some more information about those. So unless you have more further need of us, we'll go sit back there and do the talking. Thank you.
I know that we are going to have some dialogue about your talking points, but I think I would just take the last few minutes, if I could, to just talk about the tremendous work that this team has done. I really wasn't kidding when I said I was tired of Sam. That was an honest. But I'm tired, and I'm tired for the right reasons, because he's worked really, really hard, and others have worked really, really hard on this, and they have eaten, drank, and lived and breathed this thing, understanding that when we embarked on this endeavor in May, that it was an absolute unrealistic, ambitious timeline to get to where we are today. I mean, but we also knew we had this sense of urgency that we needed to do something. And so we are only here today talking about possible outcomes or achieving possible outcomes because of the hard work of this EPD staff and the steering committee that was pulled together, who met over and over and over again. And I think one of the keys for us is that we knew early on that to stay focused on moving forward and executing this plan, that we needed some external help, and we enlisted the help of Dr. Kevin Altecker to help kind of lead our path, and Kevin did a fantastic job doing that, and so he has been a great partner for us, and he's been a part of a variety of things for us that has been very, very valuable. So
I'm really, really proud of this steering committee. I'm proud of the staff at EPD and how they've thrown themselves at this. I think at this point, I think everybody's kind of patiently waiting for the 26th to happen because we've been very thoughtful and careful about not wanting to get out ahead of council with a lot of information, because that was kind of our target date to be able to deliver that first look at what this could be with council on the 26th. And so I don't want to reveal too many details of where we landed, but there's just been a lot of really good work that's gone into this, and I think it's important work as we look at how we move forward and how we attempt to gain capacity within a system-wide approach to community safety. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Okay. So what I want to do before we go into our next agenda is, does anybody have specific questions that they'd like to ask Captain Kamkar or Melinda or the group about any of the work that they presented today? And then I'll start at Q if we want to go. Helen, first.
Yeah, Sam, I missed the second of the four things: build trust, prevention, build partnerships. What was the second one of the four?
Increase
things?
safety.
Under 4.
Oh, our objectives?
Yeah. Safety. What was the safety one? There you go. Great. Increase safety. Thanks.
Is this available online?
It can be.
That would be amazing.
Yes, we'll make it available to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody have anything else specifically for the group about this?
For reference, you said the latest study was 17 immediate up to 120 or something for long-term. What is our current number for reference to, like, percentage-wise? What does that mean for our current staffing? Patrol. How many patrol officers do we have if we're fully staffed right now? Get an idea for what we're looking like.
How many patrol officers do we need to hire on top of the existing numbers? Is that what you're asking?
No. How many patrol officers do we have currently working patrol? If we're fully staffed.
If we're fully staffed?
Ish. It's fine. So I think it'd be interesting to hear, just for reference, on what the percentage of increase is for the minimum required.
In the low 80s.
That would be 84.
So you're looking at almost
Patrol.
so like a 20 to 25% increase just to meet minimum needs.
And we're considered, based on this study, we're considered unhealthy.
I would say that's true. Yeah. Okay. And then I had one more question. We're going back to 2014 for all the numbers. Is there a reason why that year was picked for, as we look at the statistics on the increase in call load and call time and all that information?
You mean, why is it that we don't go further back?
Yeah. Or is there any anecdotal information for what that previous?
My understanding is that when we switched to the SunGuard computer system, from that point on, all the data that we have, not so much that is
You're absolutely right on.
Is it correct?
So all the data prior to SunGuard Go Live is like comparing apples to oranges, and how the system is composed to. So if you want something that is an actual comparison, you have to go 2014 post.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So that also helps kind of me wrap my head. There wasn't a surge in those years, which is why we're using that. It's
No.
solely the information.
Just
So-
out of necessity.
So you can kind of extrapolate back to even go back 10 years or 15 years. Okay, thank you.
Sean, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have about 1,000 questions about this survey, but my understanding is that is not ready yet. Do we have demographic? Is demographic data one of the things that we got on that? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining next month we'll be able to look a little bit more at it. Sweet. That's all my questions.
Because that'll be as part of the city council presentation, won't it? So it'll be out at the city council meeting.
And that, if I remember correctly, that September 26th at our noon work session, we'll be spending 90 minutes on that work session on this issue. So there'll be a lot of data shared then.
Yeah, so it'll be available at that point. Okay. Scott?
I just got a few comments and a couple questions. first of all, thank you for the work. It seems like a lot of work's been done just since the identification of the problem, and looking at the statistics and the conversations. I really appreciate that. I think it's important that the community feels safe and what they're willing to pay for in that area. And when we have unanswered calls, it really erodes the credibility and the trust. And it's a very emotional piece when people feel like they're not receiving help that they're calling for. So I do appreciate that. I'm not going to let you go without the work on the KPIs, though. And I think with the survey, you have information that says this is what the community expects or wants, desires from the, and then if we build the service profiles that we send before the budget committee, then you can match the data and the metrics to what the community would want, and that allows the budget committee and the city council to fund that level of service if that's the desire, right? In that process, I think it's important that we go back and maybe use some of this data to when we look at the service profiles. I know that those came up last year and they were very generic, and
Yes.
I think you have a lot of data to dig through now to correct that.
Yes.
Make it look good and make it something that we can use. What's the growth rate for the city of Eugene right now?
Do we know that?
We grow about 1% a year roughly.
1%, so every year
Little over that.
that we do
1.1,
nothing,
1.2.
the problem gets even worse. Just our population's increasing.
Well, and I would point out in this community, maybe more than most communities I've served in, is that population number is beds and heads. And that on a daily basis, depending on what's going on, this police department serves a population of well over 200,000. And a much more diverse population than what's captured in the census. And so that's a piece of this that sometimes gets lost in translation when we look at just the 167 and some change thousand and the 47 and some change square miles. Is that, there are times where there's, we're in excess of 200,000 people that we serve. Whether you live here or visit here, you deserve quality service.
Thank you.
And not to, my apology, not to sort of the big elephant in the room sometime is the Santa Clara area. We spend a lot of time and energy in the unincorporated areas of Eugene. So when calls for service come out, and that population is not counted in our numbers.
It gets to be like peanut butter at the end, right? You're trying to go all the way to the edge of the toast.
Yes. Yeah.
I had one more. I had a question. When was the last time the city council approved an increase in the number of patrol?
I'm not gonna know that.
To the best of my recollection, it was 2000, well, actually, Alan probably knows better than I do. It was 2008, 2009 when we established the downtown team.
Yeah, we had 9 officers downtown.
Yeah,
So about a decade.
roughly, yes.
And how long before that?
Well, I can't
that's the
speak
big-
prior to that. I've been with the city for 21 years, and the only increase that I've seen in my career has been the downtown edition.
It's also important to put that in context that during that period from about 2009 to 2012, City of Eugene General Fund, which the police department sits in, whacked $30 million out of the budget and kept the police department whole, actually increased it. So.
And didn't lay off any other employees. They did a fantastic job of weathering that storm.
Yeah, but it was a lot of change to the city of Eugene, so there wasn't money to add anything. We were cutting everything at the time.
Marty?
Yeah, certainly we need better staffing. I don't think there's any dispute about that. I think one of the things as you look sort of in your lane as to the most appropriate way to do that is also start thinking about what's outside of your lane but should be, that the council will want to address in conversation with it. I mean, we tend to say when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But we're also hearing that, there are certain problems that are not well resolved to the police, but are of concern to people, negative interactions with homeless people and that sort of thing. So, certainly we want police working within the police lane, but also considering the larger thing. And we've had some really notable successes. I mean, Cahoots we fund out of the police budget, and it's really good about saving police resources to go to the true issues. As we have Uber and Lyft, there's an article today in Health Affairs about using those for non-emergency medical transports to shift some of that load away from the emergency medical system. And we're hearing a lot of community concern about homelessness. If we package this, because we're probably going to be asking voters for money with some better basic shelter options, would that be reducing the number of calls that you're receiving, because the police are what's available to address the situation? Is that so? In short, are there other services that we should be funding that would eliminate some of the sources of calls as we do increase the number of police as well? So I'll just take a step back at some point and say, are these other pieces happening, or do we need to say, hey, is there a piece that we should be talking to so they can start considering how this might weave together in the larger?
While the presentation that you had tonight was police-centric, because that's what Captain Kamkar's direction, the steering committee that he sat on and had to basically be in harmony with as a package, involved as many as 6 or 7 other individuals that represented every other piece of the system that has impact on this. So I am confident, without tipping my hand, I'm confident that on the 26th you will see a basic package, an intermediate and long-term package that has a very, very robust level of complementary services that I think will meet your needs based on what you're thinking right now. I have been very, very vocal, and again, we talked a little bit about this just a little bit ago, but I've been very, very vocal about recognizing the need for shelter and low barrier shelter space as having a significant positive outcome for my capacity to deliver public safety or safety services. There is I'm trying to be artful in how I say this because I don't want Councilor Zelenka to get a heads up against his fellow council members.
Okay, go ahead.
Earmuffs out. But it's really been a very, very encouraging process with all of our stakeholders about understanding how we all play a part in this thing, and there's a lot of options in there that are going to address the system as a whole, to include our social service providers. One of the things that's deeply embedded in our package around EPD is our relationship with Cahoots and our relationship with the CRT team. I spell it out because I say court and you think it's like municipal court, but the court team and the value that they have in responding to our highest frequency users and trying to move them onto a better path, because really how we create capacity is that we don't have to respond to people anymore or respond to complaints anymore. And understand that the important partnership with Cahoots and the number of calls that they handle, that some of which we wouldn't go to anyway, but through our dispatch center we can immediately have Cahoots respond to those things, is invaluable, which creates capacity for us to do that. So I think you'll be encouraged by the comprehensive nature of the solutions we'll come to the table with on the 26th.
Thank you.
Just to bolster that, the conversations I've had with folks, including John Reese, is, the package needs to be broad-based. It needs to be robust in all the service areas. It needs to be more than just EPD. It needs to be more balanced. So all the communications are about all the things that we're doing that are working that need to be bolstered. And so the package is going to incorporate a lot of that and enhance it.
Sure.
I was intrigued by the beds and heads comment. What sort of influx do we see over the summer as far as our population is concerned? And how does that affect staffing needs? Do we have any?
You can speak to that historically, Captain.
Well, because we're a college town, in some ways we lose a portion of our population because the students go home, right? Yeah. But when we look at our calls for service, the demand for our services, and what you end up seeing is during the summertime, the demand for services goes up, And at the same time, our staffing goes down because that's when many of our police officers take their vacation with their families and what have you. So, which makes it much more difficult for us to be able to handle calls for service.
Do we have any sort of work share with the university police staff? in regards
Yes,
to that?
yes. Now that they have a full functioning police department, they've taken the primary role of law enforcement responsibilities on and near campus. And we've got a very good relationship with them.
I've seen, I was in a fender bender near my house, and I think it was university police that responded, and I live right next to the Waitebird Clinic. Is that part of the area they're helping us with?
They are. And very soon we've entered into a new partnership with them where they'll be co-sharing the West University Police Station with us. They'll be the primary, they'll have the primary role at that substation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from anybody? So we're gonna move on. And so I put on the agenda a piece for talking points, and I prepared some suggestions for the group to look at. So as the commission, we have to vote and approve talking points like this for that we as commissioners can go out and say this is coming from the commission. So we don't have to use all these, we don't have to vote on all these, but these are just some of my recommendations that we should think about looking at doing that. I also asked Jeremy to pull up one of the presentations that we saw back when Director James was here, and I think this is the same one that he presented to the council, where it just talks about the numbers. And, you know, in here we talk about 1 in 3 calls not being answered, but when we look at the totality of calls, I think that this might be one that we might want to think about, that we talk about that there's 220 calls, am I right on that, that are not answered?
That are answered.
That are answered, 86 are not.
80.6.
So you start to see those numbers on a daily basis, that becomes a lot. Where some people, 1 in 3 may not register to them, but if they know that there's 80 calls that are not being answered a day, seems to me tremendous when we talk about those numbers. So it's something else that I want everybody to think about as we have this discussion about what our talking points should be, and that could be just added to that one line when my suggestions of saying, you could say 1 in 3, or you could say in 2017, it was on average 80 calls were not answered a day. Silver, you have it.
What types of calls are not being answered?
When a call comes into dispatch and the call taker does a good job of trying to identify the details, calls are prioritized. Priority 1 through priority 9. Your priority 1 calls would be exactly what you would think. They are serious, life-threatening calls, and goes all the way down. The majority of the calls for service that we're not able to get to are what we call cold calls. For instance, a theft that happened with no suspect, information that happened sometime in the last week, but we don't know when it happened. Cold burglary calls, same situation, no suspect, no imminent threat, and we're not sure if anything was taken. An awful lot of calls from our public around illegal camping are not responded to. And it falls within that lower priority calls. So most of the calls that don't involve a suspect being there right now or any threat to property or life are usually classified below priority 1, 2, and 3 calls. And the majority of the calls that we are answering and our officers are spending their time answering from call to call to call are the priority 1, 2, and 3 calls. However, I will say that those calls still get dispatched. They still get sent to the screen. So officers' tablets often bump up the priority calls to the top, and then the lower priority calls fall to the bottom. And it's not uncommon for officers to leave shift and have new officers come on shift with already 15 or 20 calls pending, waiting for them to try and get to those to answer. But most of them are those what we call lower priority calls because there's no imminent threat of any kind of danger or further property damage at the time of the call.
I watch the call screen from my desk pretty regularly, and it's pretty standard that any given time there's 12 to 20 calls holding to pull it up at any time during the normal business hours that I'm in the office, sitting there waiting for
One of the metrics that through our patrol allocation model identified was 236% of the time. So it sounds a little counterintuitive here, but at a factor of 2 is how frequent an officer will be on a call when they get dispatched to another call. So you think about how many officers you have to add to start eroding away at that. It's mind blowing. Out of every hour, 47 minutes of the officer's time is spent responding to calls for service. 9 minutes of that time is spent administrative function, like trying to grab lunch, go to the bathroom, and write reports. And only 4 minutes out of every hour is spent where the officer is completely unencumbered and can do whatever he or she wants to do. The national model for a healthy agency through International Association Chiefs of Police is 20 minutes, 20 minutes, and 20 minutes. Because that 20 minutes of proactive time or unencumbered or undedicated time is where all your community policing and problem solving occurs. And so you can see with 47 minutes of every hour, all we're doing is chasing calls. It makes it almost impossible to do the extra things that we need to do.
I think, this is a time for me to remind everybody about going out and writing with the officers, going over to the 911 center and sitting there for 4 hours. Because in 2 of those, when I went to each one of those, I was in the 911 center, that they actually had a call with a person with a gun, and the dispatcher had nobody to send because they all were tied up, that she just broadcasted, hoping that somebody would pull off a call and go help and go to this call. That's how it is on a lot of the days. And then I rode a graveyard shift on a Sunday night, which you'd think would be slow, and when we got in the car, the officer pulled up, and there was over 15 calls, and half of them were there since before noon that were waiting, and she started to respond to those, going to try to clear all those calls, because that's what she felt like she needed to do, because she had some time to do that. So that's what's sort of what's out there. And I think if everybody gets a chance through this process to get out and either go to the 911 center or go on a ride along, you'll see this, and you'll realize just how this is. We talk about it, we look at these numbers, but when you're out there sitting in the car with them, or you're sitting at the 911 center and watching them field calls, and they just stack up, and the dispatchers just have nobody to send to, because they can't have every car doing something. They have to have somebody that somebody needs help. And so it brings it home when you see it yourself. So
What's the best way for us to schedule those?
So your leadership's been asking about that, and you'll be getting a presentation on that next month, assuming you guys still, it's all in the plan.
But if you need something, Jeremy, you can contact Jeremy,
Yes.
and he will get you set up with whatever day and shift that you need to get.
I will be
Especially
your
the
contact
911
for that,
center
so.
is that he'll set that up, because they have to buzz you in and have you.
After he's done with all his priority calls.
We'll get to you eventually.
Really is.
Anything I need, like shoes, like.
Okay, Scott?
How often do we have the higher priority calls not being able to be responded to? Do you track that?
Well, certainly we have response times on all our calls. I mean, we're able to identify those that we respond to and the ones we don't, how long it takes us to get there. That's the beauty of the CAD system, computer-aided dispatch, to not use the acronym. That's the beauty of our computer-aided dispatch centers. It does a really good job of collecting data. And we have some really bright people that are able to crunch that data. It's been my experience, and again, this is just anecdotal because I don't have that at my fingertips. It's been my experience that we're actually really good at our life-threatening priority 1 calls. Oftentimes on the radio, what you hear is the tones go out, and when the tones go out, everybody drops what they're doing, unless they're on another life-threatening call. But they drop what they're doing and they go. But more times than not, what you hear is a dispatcher coming on the air saying, any unit to clear for this call. And to your point, that's exactly what you probably experienced. But we've had some, luckily we've had some very, very good feedback about response times and service delivery when it comes to those critical times where we have to go, we go.
The request for any unit that can clear happens regularly, day in and day out, every day. The times where it's any unit that can clear and then it's crickets on the radio is rare because of that. I mean, people, they just drop what they're doing. You cut out your cover officer early from the call that you're on. I think it adds risk to our officers, because I think you do wind up taking on things that normally you would have your cover officer longer, but if there's something greater, you just got to take on that little bit of risk. I've certainly been there on both sides of that, kicking my cover free and owning a little more risk in what I'm dealing with in order to be able to make that other call. So
I think the other unintended consequence that's important to note is that it's really hard under this atmosphere to have a true victim-centered approach to how we deliver services, because we're not spending the time with our victims that we would like to spend doing a thorough and thoughtful investigation and helping them feel better about being recently victimized, when you have this sense that your teammates are buried in work, you're buried in work, you're out with a victim. I think the motivation to try and get off of those calls quicker than usual, I think, happens every single day, and I think the unintended consequence of that is maybe victims that don't feel like they're getting quite the service that they need, and I can't blame them. I just can't blame them.
So if there's no more.
So, on this thing and in the talking points, this, when there's no immediate life of threat, is that related to both of these, or just the 1 in 3 calls?
That's the 1 in 3 calls.
Yeah. So the response time is just average over all
the calls.
All
right?
calls.
Yeah.
All calls that are answered.
All calls that are answered, and
what does that mean?
So that on average 80 aren't in that.
No, they don't.
They don't. That's the
220
calls.
If they responded.
It takes them 20 minutes.
Not if someone picked up the phone.
And the challenge, and the challenge in that, in that 20-minute, some of those calls in the 220 on average that we're answering are the ones that we respond to within minutes or seconds if we're in the right spot. Some of those are the ones that we finally pick off the screen 8 hours later. After you do all the math and normalize that and create those averages, that's where we're seeing the reason those response times are so big is because we just have more and more and more of those calls that just sit.
So now let's get. So what does everybody think of these talking points? Does anybody have any issues, any clarifications they want, any ones they like more, any ones they want to add to this list? There were thoughts here.
My first thought is that a lot of these just seem like facts that we don't, seems odd to validate facts when they're facts.
So okay, well, maybe I didn't explain. So we as a commission, if we want to speak as a commission, we have to vote on here that allows us as commission members to take this out and say, the police commission wants to support this program that we're presenting to the council, and here's why. And these are our points that we're saying, because calls for service have increased 21%. That police and 911 staffing has remained flat. Response time increased by 20 minutes since 2014. We need to have that. We have to approve ourselves to be able to say this is why we as a commission are doing that. So these
I
are
guess I just don't see
factors.
what we're actually asking for. So additional talking point would be, we support hiring more police officers for these reasons.
We are explicitly not allowed to do that.
We're not?
Yeah, I mean, there's a line between providing information to the public and advocating for a particular political outcome. And as temporary public servants, I would say there is a line
While
you
you're
can't
on a
cross.
border commission.
Yeah.
So-
Now,
Except for
personal
me.
capacity, you say whatever you want, but you can't say.
Yeah.
As a police commissioner, I believe this, or whatever you have to say.
And that's why we try to keep this just fact-based to send out, because, and there will be a time that this is, if this, as Jeremy sent out in our package a week ago or so, 2 weeks ago, is that there, if this does end up to be a ballot measure, we can no longer talk about or support it as a commission and as commissioners. We have to step back from that. That was that letter that we sent out from the city attorney's office that explained that once they become ballot measures, we can't endorse or not endorse, I guess.
Neutral, fact-based information.
So, but in the meantime, as they go through council and they do that, we can be a group that can come out and say, this is why we think that this initiative for the community justice, and these are reasons why we as a commission feel like it's important for us to support this.
So aren't all these meetings covered by public meetings? Can't I just like, if somebody asks me what I feel, just be like, this is what we talked about?
You can say that's what we talked about, but that's not what the commission has said that they support or not support and do that, which are two different things.
Okay.
Just like when we endorse a policy, we can talk about a policy, but if we don't endorse the policy written, it's not, the commission has no stake in that game.
How do you endorse a fact?
Okay, anyway, we're going off track now, so
Yeah,
these are just talking points, and so we need to move on. We can have that discussion offline about how a commission works, so is anybody in favor of this? Do we feel strongly enough that we want to do this as a commission, to come out and have talking points to support this community justice initiative that they're going to the council with?
How are you going to use it?
What was it?
How are you going to use it?
So to me, this would be, as we talk about our outreach later on this evening, that would be our opportunity to go out and say that, the commission is supporting this, and this is why we're supporting this initiative that's being presented to the council, and that we hope that you do too, and understand why it's important to get more funding for these services is the package. Would be my thought is how we use this to be able to help support this project, because we, as a commission, we haven't done a lot of that and gone out and sort of done more of an outreach of support for certain things. And I think through the last year, we felt really strongly about that we wanted to kind of take a position on this one and come out in favor of helping kind of move this through the community's process.
In that context, I would add two things to this. I would add some kind of context for it. So like the second one, police and 911 staffing has remained flat since 2009. Okay. And the same with the first one. That increase is over since 2014? So since 2014, just 4 years ago.
Well,
that gives people a little more context.
And most people don't know what the population growth is, or what the population is, or anything, and that gives some context. So, the response time has increased by 20 minutes since 2014, and our population has increased by X percent during that time. So the calls go up. I mean, that helps explain the increase in calls and the increase in time.
So we'll add that, and the population has increased.
Yeah, here's your population, but that doesn't sound right. It's only gone up
Right.
to 8,000 people. 7,000.
7,000 people.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a lot of people.
So are these friendly amendments?
We don't have a motion yet, so we're just
I think
kind
on that
of
point,
wordsmithing.
On that point, I think then it should be the service area, not the city of Eugene population. So wherever your officers respond.
That's complicated.
I'm not sure we have it.
Because we don't generally respond to low priority stuff in the unincorporated areas, but we will respond to emergencies in the unincorporated areas if that agency requests our assistance, essentially.
High priority.
Or unless we happen to hear it or see it or whatever. If there's a life safety thing, that's where the lines blur when there's a life at stake. But we're not going to burglary reports and theft reports and stuff.
But a high priority call reduces the availability somewhere else.
Yeah, but just weeding out those numbers to be able to mesh what that figure looks like would be
Understand
difficult.
the right high priority call taps every police resource we have in the city.
Oh boy.
So if you have a man with a gun, then you have all 8 of your cops going.
Oh, yeah.
And it leaves the entire 46 3/4 square miles unattended. And everything holds and stacks up for that. And that's really a piece of this that we don't talk about, is the complexity of the calls that we go to, the dangerous nature of the calls that we go to, and the multiple car responses that are now dictated. When I started as a baby cop, as a deputy in Benton County up here, I was out on Halsey Highway doing DUI enforcement by myself, and if I end up rolling around in the ditch with somebody that's intoxicated, then you figure it out. It has gotten so much more dangerous now for our police officers that it dictates multiple car responses to handle these things. So,
How many cops do we have on the street?
it varies depending on time of day and day of week. Well, day of week, they have 2 sides of the week that they work, but it varies on the time of day. We've tried to staff the different shifts that come on to try and meet the day of week, the time of day of week call demand. We've got those metrics. I think most of the teams are a sergeant plus 8, so every once in a while we could have some overlap.
Minimum staffing is anywhere between 6 and 7 officers
per shift.
At any time of day, when you combine whoever's available, is a minimum of between 6 and 8 in the wee hours of the morning to 17, 18 during the busier times of the day.
Because of the shifts overlapping each other.
Yeah.
So the teams versus the minimum required. So if somebody says, hey, can I have the night off? And we look at what's the bare minimum of officers that we're allowed to have. And it goes between 6 and I think it's currently 17 or 18 minimum.
What's the busy time of the day?
It really ramps up, and this is going, unless I'm wrong with this, it really seems to ramp up at about noon. So you get the people get into work and discover things. So it's fairly slow. In volume of calls in the earlier morning, ramps up about noon, slows down about 6 to 9, ramps up again between 9 and 2. But then again, our officer levels accommodate that, and so there's really no slow time. But that's kind of the general timeline trend.
I think it's fair. Weekends are busier than others, obviously. One of the spikes. Home football games.
The city dies. Because they're all over there.
Nothing
There's 4 hours of vacuum.
Interesting spike that we see is sometimes right around 6 or 7 a.m. where people are waking up the next morning to find that something has happened overnight, and then they all call in. Car was broken into or something like that, and so they all call in at the same time at 7 in the morning. So there are lots of cold calls that come in at 7 in the morning. Well, as that happens, you've already got 15 calls on your screen, and then you got all these cold calls coming in, and that ends up being call 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So it makes it really tough.
Happened to me when my car got stolen. Walked outside, there's no car. I got it back.
Okay, so, do we have any more comments or on any of these? And then, does anybody want to make a motion of any
I
sort?
wasn't clear, Terry, did you want to add to the third one?
Well,
Do you want to say just while population has increased, or do you want to say by 7,000?
okay, while population has increased may be a better way to say it than the 7,000, although it's a lot of people.
Or by 1 to 1.5% each year.
Right.
In the percentage rather than the dollar amount.
Okay. Yeah.
Little
Maybe.
over 1% might be a good way to say it.
So if I understand you right, Bill, what you're suggesting is that this vote is for the police commission to support the community justice initiative. And these are the talking points, the facts to move forward with in order to share that support with the community groups. Is that okay?
That's it. Exactly.
The initiative, not the package.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the community
I
justice
just didn't see
initiative.
any, we support the initiative.
Well, and that's why I thought I gathered what track you were on, because it's a little bit ambiguous in the paragraph
So-
for what was being proposed. So
Thank you.
Leave it to the policy guy to figure out how to make this work.
Want a motion?
I'd love to see a motion.
move to approve talking points as amended.
Second by Gordon. Okay, any other discussion on these? No other discussion, all.
Is there-
Oh, that's over.
Yeah, so is there a time frame for these? So where's an action item for today?
26th.
Is there?
The time frame is the 26th.
Well, this is just an ongoing time frame. They're gonna do the presentation, but there's gonna be that the council is then going to, that's a work session that they're gonna.
Yeah, there's no action on the 26th.
Yeah, it's just more, so this is just,
the
we're
first
gonna have
time
to
we'll see it.
help support this through as the council starts to have their discussions about what they want to do and the packages that are presented from the various groups that have put this together.
The 26th is the unveiling and then ta-da.
Okay.
I think October 22nd may be our first time back with you for any potential action, if I saw the calendar correctly.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Perfect. Passes. Thank you so much for that. With that, we're running a little behind schedule, but that will make up, I'm sure.
So that I understand, once I've made the changes to it, then you want it sent out
Yeah, then we,
weekly?
yeah, we can set out this Fridays, everybody has these are what we approved.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Just one clarification. Did say on the first one, as amended, we didn't really clarify that, but I thought that number of 80 calls per day by 2017 was an important factoid on the first bullet. That weren't.
80 calls.
Yeah.
Gave an alternate.
Oh, that was
Or an
more for-
additional.
That was,
Mention of the number.
Additional.
right,
fact.
that was for number 4. We're talking about responding to
Right,
3
right.
calls.
Right,
Or-
response.
Or we could say 80,
1 in 3 calls was 80 calls a day.
80 calls a day on average.
Right.
And when you say unresponded, I mean, eventually they get, somebody responds, or this is the nobody responds
This is,
eventually?
many of these never get a response, and it's just never carried through.
A lot of those are the things where if we don't get there, then the problem is resolved and there is no problem to
Right,
deal with
right.
anymore because it's
Wasn't-
vanished on its own.
You brought up the illegal camping before, is that?
I'm sorry?
The illegal camping is often one of
Yeah,
those.
that's a good example, or somebody's trespassing on my, and then, 8 hours later, there's no trespassing issue. We have no suspect information, we have no idea who it is. The best you have is a description, or maybe the victim is gone, we don't even have a victim at that point, so.
Yeah, the complainant's gone to bed and
Yeah.
don't want to deal with it on the next day because it's over.
Okay. Good. Thank you, everyone. So we'll move on to the chief's report.
I will be brief and will not belabor all of the discussion we've had, but I'll give you an update on kind of what's going on with your police department as it pertains to staffing and our ability to respond to calls for service. Currently, we are down 14 police officer positions, and we are expecting as many as 10 or 12 more vacancies in 2019 through retirement. That's the bad news. The good news is that we are on pace over the next several weeks to make job offers to as many as 17 or 18 brand-new police officers. I have been working unusual hours to meet with these individuals. One thing that's changed since my arrival, and it's just a personal preference, is that I meet with every single police officer before we say yes or no to the hire. I feel strongly, I look each police officer in the eye and ask them, amongst other things, based on their background, I ask them why Eugene, to make sure they're coming here for the right reasons, and whether they understand what it is that's going to be expected of them in the way of how we deliver service. And so I continue to do that. Next week is a week of some out-of-state candidates that will be here, and I'll see 7 additional ones next week, but there's a chance that 17 or 18 police officers will be yielded out of this process. The other process has already started, and so we're at about a 60-day to 90-day turnaround for our processes. So as we look at the vacancies we have now and the potential for 2019 vacancies, I'm encouraged by the fact that we have tremendous amounts of momentum right now around recruiting and hiring police officers. Understand that by the time we get them hired and get them through the pre-academy, then go to the academy, and then come back on field training, it's a year to 18 months before we see the value out of them. But we have a lot of really, really good momentum right now that I think that puts us in a really, really good position. So if successful through some kind of an initiative with community justice, the question is, Chief, how quickly could you get police officers on? I would be able to say, well, we're already in a process right now, in a cycle right now, that we can grab potential candidates sooner rather than later, which is really good, instead of having to stand something up once we're given kind of the thumbs up, if that's the case. The candidate pool is got some diversity in it that I'm excited about. I don't want to tip my hand too much until they get through the psychological and the medical. They have to pass those things before they're actual employees, and so it's not fair to do that. But there's some diversity in this candidate pool that I think is really, really good for our organization. And we have a few laterals from other agencies that are coming to EPD for the right reasons, and that's really important when they have a lateral candidate, that they're coming for the right reasons and they're not leaving a bad situation, and we do not want to inherit somebody else's problems, and so I'm very sensitive to that. So that's good news. We're really, really moving in the right direction as it pertains to the recruitment and hiring of police officers. Same with dispatch. We've got as many as 7 or 8 in background. We are hoping to have dispatch in a place where they're fully staffed in the not so distant future, and that'll be the first time that's happened in a long time. Same with the police department. If I can fill all of those FTEs, I'm not sure we've ever had both of those agencies fully encumber their FTEs, maybe ever. I don't know, but it's always a moving target for us.
So, Chief, you said 14 positions. You're down 14, and you're going to lose maybe 10 or 12.
We have 10 or 12 scheduled.
Gain 18, so you're still going to be down.
Yeah, so I'm still going to be down, but my hope
Like
is
7 or
that
8.
through this process, if there's 18 job offers, if we're doing the math right, that's 4 overhire early, and then I'm going to continue to ask for city manager approval to overhire with salary savings we're having in 18 in preparation for the departures in 19, so that we're not starting from scratch in the next round.
Okay.
So we're
By
not
the end of
starting by
19,
scratch. Right.
It'll be a full complement.
Right. So that's the game plan. Recently had some sergeant lieutenant promotions, so we've got some new baby sergeants and baby lieutenants that have gone through a supervisory academy and are working right now, and so it's been my first chance to pick the next leaders of our organization, and of course I meet with all of them as well, one-on-one, and have that conversation. I like to say older brother conversation. I'm not ready to say fatherly conversation just yet, but the older brother conversation. That is happening right now. Next week we have a process by which we're going to interview a few candidates that will be potentially my next deputy chief of police, and so I'm excited to get that going so that I can get some help in here to lead this organization. An organization this size, it's almost unheard of to not have a deputy chief that can help with the leadership, and so we'll see if the right candidate is in that pool, and if they're not, then we'll go back to the drawing board. That has to be the right person, and so we'll see, and some of you in this room are a part of that process, and so we're going through that. So there's a lot of really good things happening with your police department in the way of leadership and hiring and trying to get the right people as a part of this organization to move us forward. And so with that, I'd entertain any questions maybe you had during this short amount of time.
Thank you for embracing the overhire thing. It seems like we're always chasing and never catching up. And while it is convenient to give money at the end of the year for the budget, it's not really what's intended.
Right.
Yeah. Having been on the budget committee.
Yeah, we're trying to be, and the city manager has been really, really good about being strategic about the timing of this and understanding that, if we can forecast where we're going to have those vacancies, and we know that being down as many as when I got here, it was only 7 positions, now we're 14. Those vacancies are a result mostly of some officers that did failed FTEP that weren't a good fit, and a couple of them that just resigned for a variety of reasons. But through this first half of this fiscal year, we're seeing significant salary savings that we can leverage to be able to overhire in preparation for the 2019 retirements that we'll see after. We've got significant number of employees that have been here 25 and 30 years. I'm happy to report that some of those individuals that were slated to go in 19 have been so encouraged by kind of just the new energy in the police department that they're thinking about sticking around. And so that's good news, because we like having those seasoned officers that understand, you know, who we are, where we're going, and how we want to get there to stick around and help mentor our youngsters. So we'll see. We may not see 10 or 12 leave in 19, and if we don't, then we'll be in great shape. And if that's the case, and through this community justice initiative, if we get some affirmation on that and get the approval to go ahead, then we'll be ahead of the game to be able to identify those FTE that are associated with this initiative, and then it gives me an opportunity to start doing some strategic planning on where those FTE are going to go to best serve the community. And I've got some strategies around that I'll talk a little bit about on the 26th, I'm sure.
First of all, I can't believe we're talking about 2019 already, but in my 12 years on the council, I don't recall us ever being at full complement in officers. So that's excellent that you're finally getting to where we were able to do that. I remember talking to Chief Kearns, and he said, I can't remember exactly what he said. I think it was 1 in 100 applicants from putting in an application to becoming a sworn officer make it through the process. Is that about right?
It probably is a little bit better than that, but not much. We got a really interesting pool of candidates this summer. We had about 350 applicants for the people that I'm seeing now that are just getting through background. They were in this interesting pool of candidates, about 350. We ended up taking 35 of them to background out of 350, so 10% went to background. And then out of the background, only 20 of them passed the background. So that's kind of our numbers. 350 to start with, we ended up with 20. It's an unusually large number. We've never had this many go to background out of a candidate pool that big. And so I think that is not going to be the norm, but it came at a perfect time for us to have that many candidates that were suitable through their background to be considered police officers. But I will tell you, of the 20, there's already 2 or 3 in there that I've said no to after meeting with them one-on-one. And that's one of those things that, you know, if you've ever done any hiring, you know that when you sit across from somebody, look them in the eye, listen to them communicate, listen to their motivations for being here, that you just have to trust your gut. You just have to trust your gut that they're not the right fit for your community. And that's the piece of that chief's interview that's important to me.
Silver?
No disrespect, but I love the visual, the mental image of baby sergeant, baby captain. I'll go to bed thinking about that.
Except it's probably depends.
I'm glad to hear that you're so involved in that process, and it's good to know that you're, you know, having those meetings and those one-on-ones with the officers before you make the decision. So,
yeah, it's important to me. If I'm going to be responsible for the service that they deliver, then it's important for me to be able to say I'm the one that hired them, and I'm held accountable when we swing and miss. And if I'm going to be held accountable, then I want eyes on it. So, great.
So I threw myself in the queue. I got the opportunity to meet one of your newest lieutenants, I guess Lieutenant Smith. I can't call her Sergeant Smith anymore, and I think that was a great to promote her up. I know I think she's just an acting.
She's acting right now, and she actually did not put in for this most recent process, but Julie, she has got the aptitude and she has got the chops to do that job. And so I'll look forward to watching her rise in her leadership capacity in this organization. So,
That was good to see.
yeah.
Got to see a sergeant out too on the street that same day. I won't mention any names. Nice to see him out.
Uniform still fits.
But he had it, but
2.5 years in an office.
But I let him roll with the beard, though. He's the envy of every other police officer out there.
It was weird to put on a uniform and walk by the mirror and have a beard. It was very unusual. I swindled the chief into signing a directive that allows normally non-uniformed people that are working just temporary stuff to be able to keep their facial hair, and I hope to bid to push that even deeper.
Kyle's chipping away at me.
Oh, I've still got a list.
I'm sure you do.
You are reading everything he puts in front of you.
I've recognized early in my tenure that there's some that I don't have to read, but his are every word, yes.
I appreciate that.
Any other questions for the chief? Thank you. Thank you, Chief. So we're going to move on. The chief may sneak out of here now.
Sneak out a little bit. I'm going to leave this in Kyle's capable hands for the policy.
Scary. You
Okay.
sure?
I trust you implicitly.
So with that, we will move on to the Taser Policy. Sergeant Williams.
For the interest of time, would it be all right if we actually did the OC first? Because I think that'll be quicker, and then we'll have a larger time period to look at the Taser?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is really only some basic adjustments. And so the basis for this is that a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, we started having some civil disobedience issues in Eugene. And we began to stand up a crowd control team again. And with that, we began looking at additional tools for crowd control purposes. And so that's where pepper ball came. The pepper ball policy was rewritten or modified. Should we wait for Counselor Zelenka? Or we just? Okay.
Touch base.
So what we realized was that our OC policy, because the pepper ball is an OC base, basically they've clashed in that pepper ball would be used for crowd dispersal, and this says that OC can't be used for crowd dispersal. So that brought us to our attention that we needed to make a little modification. So really all we're doing here, so then from that, as time went on and we didn't have the ramp up of continued civil disobedience, riotous behavior, the crowd control thing has sort of been on a back burner. It really hasn't gone anywhere. And there's some differing opinions about the effectiveness of pepper ball and whether or not that really is the latest and greatest tool that we would use anyway. And so the chief and I, at the very last minute, opted to not send that forward for discussion today because we just don't really know what that looks like. But in order to set the stage for it, because there are some OC-based options out there that are super effective and are different tools, and it could be that we do look at adding pepper ball in addition to some other things. We wanted to make sure that we at least got the OC policy looked at, adjusted, and then while I have only commented on these couple of pieces, if there's anything in here that anyone has concern or would like to have discussion about, we can address those as well. And then we will put a new review date on the policy and say it was stamped today. So the changes that I am requesting or recommending are under 803.3. It's on the second page at the top, and it just designates under you may use OC spray. So we're designating OC spray specifically in this section where it says OC should not be used as a means to disperse crowds. It says OC spray should not generally be used as a means to disperse crowds. So my goal with this as well is that we have taken a very hard approach against OC due to some historical events. we lost the tool because we screwed up, but we're also a totally different police department in a totally different time, and I think there's some opportunity to kind of roll that back a small bit because OC is a phenomenal tool. The way that we train is essentially that OC locks people down and it makes them shut down and stay where they're at, where gas will make people go away and go somewhere else. But the reality is that if you're miserably uncomfortable because you're the victim of OC spray, you're not going to stay in a place where that stuff is continuing to potentially get used. And so it is going to push you out. And it has a pretty quick effect on folks. So my goal here is to just, without giving a carte blanche, because we don't want that, is to allow a very moderate increase in the potential use, which will allow us to train people in being open-minded to, this is a good tool if you have disorderly people, and you either need to make room for you or to disperse a group of people to give one more tool that's concentrated to a specific group of people. So that's where we added the generally, so that it's not the first tool you should go to, but it's still an option. The next line, so then I split that into 2 lines. So you'll see the although it has been crossed out, and it says, OC spray may be used when reasonably necessary to defend persons or to assist in effecting an arrest or to subdue a particularly disorderly element of a crowd. And that came from, I have always felt like we were too restrictive on our OC use for crowd control riot situations. And I think it was last year's May Day riots. I watched a video of a group of Seattle police officers that were getting surrounded by a crowd. I should have found it so we could see it here, because it's just amazing. So there's a small group of officers that are getting surrounded by a crowd of a couple hundred, maybe. I mean, it's like building to building downtown. So the whole street, sidewalk, everything. The crowd's coming up on the officers. You can see 2 pull up with what's called a magnum fogger, and it's essentially a water bottle size thing of OC with a handle on it. And you see 2 very quick, couple of quick bursts into the crowd, and that group vanished. I mean, it went from being where they were between you and me from them as they're encroaching on the officers to 2 lanes of free and clear traffic in the bubble, clearly creating a safety space for the officers there. And so that's where the particularly disorderly element of a crowd. So if there is a group that's causing more disruption, and you need to get them not causing disruption, that OC spray is a decent tool for that. So those are my 2 requests, and the rest of it's all pretty standard. I don't have any concerns or requests for the rest of that. So that's my spiel.
Okay. Anybody have any comments?
Sticking to it.
I'm just going to move to approve the policy.
Oh, okay. Anybody have any comments or anything else?
I just have grammar stuff I'll just talk to you all about later.
Out of the stuff that was modified or other things? Because if it was other stuff, it wasn't mine, and I'm happy to change.
Criteria. Yeah. That was somebody else did?
We are short of quorum, unfortunately.
Oh.
Did that one.
Oh,
When
yeah.
he comes in,
He's
he'll be
right
back.
out there talking.
He's talking
So
to the chief.
you all can strong arm him into.
So do we change things like that, or we don't care?
Oh, the grammar. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
Well, that's not
absolutely.
a sentence, that's all.
Oh, so where is it?
Under use criteria,
Usually
Yep.
scripted.
although not required, officers should consider using a verbal warning prior to using OC against an individual, period. Also, officers should consider the likelihood, there's no subject in there, that's why it's not you have to repeat that officers should consider. And then it will convince a person to comply, just put with instructions, leave out your, because you don't use a personal pronoun when you're talking about it.
And that goes to a kind of an older style where we've tried to scrub those out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll make sure. I've got a volunteer who
Yeah,
does a
that's it.
very good job of doing that stuff, and I'll have
Yes,
her
I know.
take a good look at this one.
Yeah.
Tasers.
We're going to come back to it.
We're coming back to that.
CS one is mostly just little stuff.
I figure if I read it and
They
don't
wanna train
understand it, then I have to go back and figure it out.
Yeah, no, I
What?
appreciate it.
What was that?
So before we do make a vote, has there been pepper spray used from the department? I mean, historically, you're talking about the Jim Torrey incident, but has it been used since, and in what capacity?
Since then, for riot or in general?
For riot.
It's possible and isolated under these, like to make an arrest, if you've got a group of officers that are going in to make an arrest, that it could have been used. It's pretty uncommon. We really don't, and it's really unfortunate. Because the alternatives are gas and sticks. So would you rather that we're hitting people or spraying them with pepper spray and letting them go find some place to put water on their face and be less uncomfortable than they were? So I think it is unfortunate that we haven't, although it shouldn't be the first thing that we go to. We shouldn't just be raining pepper spray down upon a crowd.
No, sorry, you may have said this, that I'm a little more familiar with CS gas, I'm sort of in the military. Is that still employed or just less? Okay. I know it's
Wait,
less.
CS or
CS
pepper?
gas.
Oh yeah, no, that is kind of the go-to. I mean, that's our go-to. Fortunately, we haven't had an incident where we've had to use it, and it's probably been 7 or 8 years. We were in a weird dry spell.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
That's from Micah, you know.
Well.
Here, we'll do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, we have not used it much, but that is what we've always trained is early, often, and with lots, in order to keep the crowd from getting into that overwhelming where it's destructive. And gas is generally pretty safe. It clears quickly. Symptoms clear quickly. You get out of the area, it clears up, and you're fine again. Like fast, mostly, depending on how much you get. Sometimes it can take 20 or 30 minutes, but that's still quick in comparison to pepper that can stick. Especially if you don't wash, it really sticks.
But it'll cure a cold.
Yeah, no
It does.
joke. So Counselor, the changes that I'm requesting are that we focus this policy on the second page, second paragraph, that we've added spray. So OC spray should not generally be used as a means to disperse crowds. So it's not the first tool, but it is a possible tool. And then in addition to that OC spray may be used when reasonably necessary to defend persons or to assist in effecting arrest or to subdue a particularly disorderly element of a crowd. So if we have a group of people that are causing particular problems, that OC spray is an effective potential use for targeting that one group in order to try to push the troublemakers out. And with pepper, you have a better odds of keeping them out and not continuing to come back, getting out of the gas, clearing up, and then jumping right back into the fray. So those are the only.
I like your turn of phrase. I did have one question. I go, why isn't this just called pepper spray policy? Because that's what you even call it.
Because this is technically what it is.
Oh.
The Narcan policy is the naloxone whatever, because that's technically what it is that we use.
So we don't.
I don't know.
Put that in parents and pepper spray policy.
We could call it pepper. I don't know, because it was like this, and I didn't change it.
Well,
Wasn't in
capsicum's red pepper, not black pepper. I don't know if that makes any difference, but that's
Yeah,
why it's
I don't know.
capsicum.
Well, and we do refer to it as pepper or OC. I mean, well, OC spray is very common vernacular for it also. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll look for a motion. Marty moves. Second. Alan seconds. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now that kicks us into Taser. And how much time do we have?
Well, we have about
Technically 25 minutes.
So there's no demonstration on the pepper spray thing?
I'd be happy to set that up for you.
I was gonna volunteer Marty, but.
OC was enough. Or CS was enough. CS was
I won't be bashful. It's terrible stuff. I mean, it's horribly uncomfortable, depending on how significant of a shot you get. But it's very uncomfortable. At the same time, you can fight through it. You can work through it.
Yeah.
It's not.
It lingers.
Can.
That's how I've been exposed to it in detention. They sprayed it for some kids, and I walked in later.
Yeah.
The most important part of this
And that's how I
policy
know
is you should
it
generally
makes
be
us go.
upwind.
Yes, indoors.
Well, and indoors, my
Control in the guard.
my
We're downwind.
first big Donnybrook.
I hate to interrupt, but we are running.
Yeah, that's true. All right. As we digress.
Well, darn.
Okay, so with Taser, as you all have probably seen, there are very, very few changes. And 99% of what I've recommended or requested here are just simply removing additional verbose language that was good for quantifying what was allowed and what wasn't, and the reasons for why it was, because there was a lot of community interest in this policy, and more the technology, and because of that, the policy. And so what I've done here is really tried to simplify it down to being much more typical of how our policies are written, where this policy could basically, you could walk into a place that didn't have a policy manual and it stands on its own as its own document, where that's not the way we do things. I mean, we have a symphony of policies that are all working in conjunction, and so there's a lot of things that were written here that I've recommended remove in order to allow us to rely on all those other policies. So with that, I'll just start going down the list. 809.1. So I've struck the language when properly applied in accordance with this policy. Well, I think we can make the assumption that you have to follow the policy, and we believe this, that the taser is considered a less lethal device, and obviously it has to be used in conjunction with the policy because that's what we have here. And I'm going to just slowly work through, so if people have discussion, just dive in and we'll try to be quick about this.
Because I think most people have read it. Do people have specific sections that they have questions on that maybe we could just move to that if you're okay with that, Sergeant? I just want to make sure we get through.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff, so yeah.
Does that work for everybody? Is everybody okay with that?
If by that you meant if he explains what he deleted and stuff? Because I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, no, he's saying without doing that, but if you'd like to do
my
that.
suggestion was, instead of him going section by section, that we would just talk about sections that we have concerns about, why he removed language or why he changed language. But if you want him to walk through the whole thing, we just won't get through the whole policy tonight. Okay, so, because we ran out of time, we
We could table it.
It's not that many.
I'm okay walking through if I can
right?
get something to notch on.
I would recommend that even if it takes another meeting because this is an important one. I think we ought to talk about each of the, or we just lock the door and we stay in here until it's done.
Okay.
You know I like to do that.
I would just, I would say,
You could taser me on the way out.
I'll slowly cut down my little side.
So with that, then I will probably stop at 7:45 and we'll move to the next agenda item. So Scott we can get that.
Okay, so 809.2, an officer leaving an officer who has completed department-approved training may be issued a taser for use during his or her current assignment. I removed the section that says that if you leave a particular assignment, you might have to give it back, because it's like any other equipment that we're going to just manage that internally, and if you don't need it, most officers are issued them, period, anyway. And like even in my office job, I still have a taser because I still go out every now and again, or I could be potentially. So that seemed unnecessary to me. Officers will only use a taser and cartridges that have been issued by the department. That's any of our equipment. So that's pretty standard for us. It just seemed like extra that was unnecessary. And if there's disagreements, dive in here. Whenever a practical officer should carry at least 2 taser cartridges on his or her person at all times while carrying a taser. It just seems a little redundant, so I removed that. Unless it would otherwise endanger the safety of an officer or another person, or is impractical due to circumstances, an explicit verbal announcement of the intended use of the taser will precede the discharge of a taser in order to warn.
No, whenever possible, warning should be given.
Yeah, because it's a little hard with the way the
Yeah,
track changes
right.
was done. So basically what I'm suggesting is we simplify that to whenever possible, warning should be given prior to the discharge of a taser, period. So you should give a warning without having all the added. This warning should give the individual a reasonable opportunity to comply and warn other officers of the potential use.
I was just thinking, this sounds like it was written by an attorney.
Whenever possible, I would say whenever consistent with the tactical situation, or I'd actually give officers a little more. Whenever possible is technically, well, it was possible. It wasn't smart, but it was possible to give a warning. So I might add a little.
Whenever practical?
Whenever practical.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I don't try to wait too much on word choice, but I don't want you constrained.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So then the next section is another long description of each step you should take in order to provide that warning, and I just simplified it to, if the verbal warning does not bring the individual in compliance, the visual stimulus of the laser or electrical arc may be utilized as an additional step when circumstances allow it. When practical?
I think practical.
Whenever practical? Just to kind of keep it,
Instead of whenever circumstances.
when circuit, yeah. We'll put whenever practical there as well.
Is this policy from April 2015? Is that why we're going over it?
It was probably reviewed or had some minor adjustment made at that time. The bulk of it really is 2008, 2009, 06? I couldn't tell you exactly. So the bulk of it, so the 2015 would have been a review was done.
So can the officer aim directly at the eyes after this?
No.
The language was removed?
So that again is that's a training item. We train not to, you don't want to shoot somebody in the face with it, so you shouldn't be aiming there anyway. It just seems like we're concerned about the laser going in somebody's eyes, as opposed to where your aiming trajectories are. It just seemed unnecessary because it would be counter to our training and expectation anyway.
Why don't you say that in the policy?
Yeah, is there any way to clarify that? Just in this subsection.
How about consistent with training?
Let me make a note on the side.
809.4.2
it probably says in here somewhere
Officer
that.
should not intentionally aim for the head, neck, chest, or groin.
There we go. So if you're not aiming for it, then the laser's not going to be in their eyes. Although we also don't want to. The laser flashed my eyes. Well, it was also mayhem at that time too. So does that okay?
That's fine.
So use of the taser. Again, just extra stuff that just felt unnecessary to me, and if you guys disagree, let me know. The taser should only be used when its operator can safely approach the subject within the operational range of the taser. Obviously, if it doesn't work, then we should probably look at something else. Again, that whole next paragraph is similar. It's more training, like it's training, it's not policy related. And then authorized use of the taser, again, there's just, we have a policy that dictates our use of force and all the considerations to take, so why are we rewriting it in a long, you see what I did there. Taser use is considered use of force and shall be employed in a manner consistent with policy 800 use of force. That added a little. So then the whole next page, almost the next 2 pages, are unchanged because those really are all the considerations and the when you can and when you can't of the taser, and that's not what we're trying to change. We're not trying to make any changes in how and when we deploy it. Just trying to make it easier to read. So 809.4.3, the standard taser discharge is 5 seconds in duration. Again, that's operating manual, training manual information that this seemed like it was unnecessary for the purpose of the policy.
I guess I don't know how a taser works. It shoots in, 2 probes go in, and you hold the stand up. Don't need.
Yeah, you want me to go get mine? So you pull the trigger.
This is a chair, vice chair kind of thing, right? This is where
This piqued my interest there when he was volunteering to be tased.
Right. So you pull the trigger.
It's gonna be fun.
2 probes.
New guy, get the new guy.
We do this to everybody.
2 probes come out. One goes straight, one goes at a downward angle. The 2 probes strike whatever target, hopefully the target you're aiming at, preferably in a big muscle group and another big muscle group, which happened to be my only taser deployment in the field. It was perfectly a pectoral muscle and a leg muscle. And then it, without any additional inputs, holding the taser gun, I guess, it deploys 5 seconds. So it runs a 5-second cycle with the wires connected. You can flip it off mid-cycle if you choose to. So if you're gaining compliance and you no longer need it, you can turn it off. At the same time, with a pull of the trigger, you can initiate an additional 5 seconds. So every time you pull the trigger, it runs a 5-second cycle.
You can do that multiple times.
Yeah, but you can go until the battery's dead. Not by policy, but there's no restriction on the gun on the device. It'll just keep cycling at the 5-second rate, or at least until maybe you could potentially overload it, the capacitors in it, I guess, if you went back to back to back to back. But I'm not aware of that happening. And so these are all things that we discuss in the prescribed training, and we actually still say that there's a 5-second duration here. So multiple taser discharges or discharges exceeding the standard 5-second duration may increase the risk of injury or death and should be avoided when possible. So you can just pull the trigger and it'll keep running as long as you're holding the trigger. So again, we train, you pull the trigger, finger off the trigger, let it run the cycle. We also train that when people so you're supposed to spark test it prior to your shift to make sure that it's working. So you pull the cartridge out, you cycle it once. Oftentimes, we had a lot of people that were getting into where they were pulling the cartridge out, popping it off, and then after a second, flicking it back off. But then that was muscle memory training people to turn them right back off. And my recollection is we had a couple of cases where that happened. So the recommendation now is take it out, let it cycle the entire bit, let it do its little reset, and then turn it off, put the cartridge back in, and pull straight. A little bit of interesting info. So then here we go into another big long description that just felt like it was redundant for training and policy purposes. If after a single discharge of the taser, which should normally be of 5 seconds duration, an officer is still unable to gain control of an individual and circumstances allow the officer to consider whether or not the taser is making proper contact, whether the taser is limiting the person's ability to comply, or if other tactics may be more appropriate or effective. And it goes on, and it just seemed like a lot of stuff. So I left in when practical officers should give a verbal warning prior to each discharge. So obviously the first one we want a warning, and if you're able to, we want you to make continued warnings as you're able to. Only one officer. Only one officer at a time should discharge his or her taser. If more than one taser is unholstered for potential use, officers should communicate with each other in order to prevent multiple discharges. Well, again, that's you should be communicating to also make sure that you've got somebody with lethal coverage if they need it. So that, again, is just a standard police policy practice related component that goes in everything we do. The number of taser discharges against a person should not exceed 3 or a total duration of 15 seconds. And I added the word usually, because you don't know where we're going to wind up being, how far away our cover is. My brother got in a fight that this guy would not end. It went on and on. He was by himself for a long time, and he tased a guy 5 times because it was working to keep him down, and other tools weren't working, and he was buying time to get more people there to be able to take him into custody. And so would we rather that after 3, then you go to pepper spray or a stick and you start beating on him? Or would you rather that you continue to apply the taser, wait for more people to get there, and then you can over-muscle the person and get him into custody? I feel like softening that a little bit. While we don't want to open the door to just, again, like the OC, just hold the trigger and just let it rip. But I think there's some room for adding the usually word in there. And that may be one that people here have a concern about.
Has there been any studies about that there's over a certain amount that we start to increase the risk of injury to the person?
I believe that this was created by us, and I ran these changes by our DT taser person. I didn't mention that. I didn't point this one out specifically, but he was in agreement with the recommended changes here. I don't recall specifically. The problem is, what's the alternative? So it does increase the risk, but if that means we're gonna let somebody back up and then we continue to get in a knockdown, drag out, then we're beating them, like I said, we're beating them with a stick, we're hosing them with pepper spray, or we're shooting them. And I get that it may add risk, and I'm not asking that we just say, hey, tase, 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 tase all day. But it usually shouldn't be. But if you need it and it's working, keep using it until you can quit using it safely. I mean, that's more what I get that it certainly could add risk. And I would submit that anything that uses force adds risk to people. But what are we mitigating as long as it's done with the whole policy in consideration? What are we mitigating by telling people, hey, if this is working,
And if you're warning
and it's
in between
avoiding
each time.
and it's avoiding additional.
Okay, but
So
I think we need to ask that question, because
Okay.
if the
I
person
will,
dies
I'll look into that.
after the fifth one,
And maybe 4
and
should have been
then
delivered
people
or
say,
something.
you should have known that after 3, it increases the risk by 50% that they could have a cardiac issue. I think that's something we need to make sure we understand
Yeah.
before we say, because, yeah, you may take the chance of going over policy in a safety situation, but if.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to look into that. Off the cuff, my impression or recollection from it is that it's not a substantial increase, and I will verify one way or another for the commission.
I
I'm happy
guess
to do that.
If you're gonna, I like that, Bill, that's really good, Ed. And if you're gonna do that, then maybe, usually, seems like a giant loophole and says, should not be exceeded 3 times or duration of 15 seconds unless there's a circumstance that you feel it's safe and the circumstance warrants, and then additional. Additional
Would-
shockings.
Is
So
it?
it's a judgment call, but
Yeah.
it seems like the policy should probably be 3 pending the look at the medical.
As
But
a,
allow it to go forward more if you need to, and it's safe and it's under the right circumstance.
yeah. Does the semantics game of putting generally in there, which is more consistent with policy, does that change your or adjust in one way or the other? I don't know that it does, but I'm just wondering about the semantics of that word. If the word usually feels
Generally,
too
usually
soft.
the same for me. Is,
Okay.
He said, against person should not exceed 3 times unless, then come up with a test.
Okay.
Specific exemption.
Yeah, some kind of more specificity.
And if we can prove that, 5 doesn't put any more risk than 3, then, it makes it a little easier to allow beyond that. And I don't know the answer to that kind of.
Yeah, yeah. And I figured that this would be a tough sell, that there would be some concern about loosening that up. So I was fully expecting some discussion about this adjustment here.
Glad to meet your expectations.
I hate to be disappointed.
What's the next one you might?
So I hate to do this, because I know Kyle's not going to be here next month. We are at 7:45, and we still have.
Basically 1 page. It's only like 1 page.
I see 3.
Well,
See 2.
the next page is 2 very easy, and the page after that is the only one that has, yeah.
Well, I'll ask our next agenda item person if they're willing to give up some of their time.
I'll yield 4 minutes of my time to you to finish this if I can get 100% cooperation from those at the table. Putting their name into the spreadsheet.
Oh, I know where this is going, yeah. Go.
Okay, so we had a lot of discussion about it. I spoke with the chief, and so we have recommended striking the blue team reporting requirements for a display of the taser. And part of this goes also towards reducing workload on employees for information that we don't gather for any other use of force tool. Even though it would be fantastic if we could collect stats on everything we do, there's a cost to that. And then taser cam, we don't even have taser cams. We did early on, but they're not any good. The aftercare section, we really we simplified a bunch of that because there's just a ton of language in there about what the aftercare is, and essentially cut it down to EMS will be summoned to examine individuals who have been subject to the electric discharge of a taser and/or struck by probes. Officers who are trained to do so may remove the metal probes from a person struck with the taser probes. If a person is struck with the probes in a sensitive area, the probe should be removed by a medical professional. Following use of a taser, officers should monitor the person's breathing and keep him or her in a position that allows adequate respiration. Any person who has been subjected to the electric discharge of a taser and/or struck by a taser probe will be medically assessed prior to being booked at a correctional facility. Prior to transitioning custody of a person to a correctional facility, hospital, or other facility, officers should advise the appropriate receiving party of the taser discharge. So I think we cover that they're going to be evaluated. If we hit something sensitive, that we should let professionals remove them, and the extra stuff is just relatively unnecessary. If requested by a person, medical staff can. So if they want them removed, regardless, that we can allow medical personnel to do that. So the excited delirium bit, we're trained in that. We're always keeping track of it. We're rendering aid to people no matter what, based on our procedure that we all approved a couple of years ago. And so it's just again, excited delirium is something that we're dealing with, regardless of the taser and other things. So the actions following taser discharge. So we reduced that to say, take photographs of any visible marks left by the taser probes, as well as any other injuries.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
so this whole section that you just deleted, that's covered someplace else in policy? That's why you're deleting it? Is that what I gathered? This whole delirium.
Excited.
stuff,
Yeah,
excited delirium.
Yes.
It's covered someplace else. So,
Yeah.
It's not necessary to be redundant here.
No, because really, when we can wind up dealing with somebody who's potentially under the influence or under the medical problem of excited delirium that isn't tased, that's just being disorderly, disruptive. We're very well trained and always on the lookout for it. It's not uncommon to hear officers requesting medics because they suspect somebody is under the influence or not, whatever, suffering from excited delirium. So it has become much more common, trained, and something that we're used to dealing with. And I would say that when this policy came out, it was less so. It was kind of an emerging thing. And I could figure out where in our other policies we talk about it, but I'm sure it's got to be written somewhere in one of our policies because it's very commonly trained. And I'm sure it's in there. I would just have to dig around and find it.
I had a question about the AFIDs.
Yeah,
Well, so how are they collected? It says at least 3 from each cartridge.
Can we do the paragraph 1 above first real quick?
Yeah, sorry.
Keep me on track here.
Well, I don't know if we're ready to vote. I mean, you're going through this, but I'm not sure we're going to have time to really sit and vote and do all of that on it. So, because also I want to have that question answered about whether it's medically okay to tase more than 3. So.
What it would allow us to do is not have to pick up and then come back yet again to do. If we can get through this part, then I can come back with the questions answered, and then we can do a vote with the whole thing in one pie. If we need to stop now, we can, but.
Stop it right at
809.6.
So you got one more thing.
But we're like a half a page away from. But I know we're on a timeline. I'm sorry.
So with these, are there any permanent AFIDs involved with the person that has been tased?
The aphids are these little pieces of paper that are little itty bitty pieces of paper that are in the cartridge, and they shoot out like confetti with the cartridge. And I need to do a little bit of research on this, but because of the timing, I wasn't able to do it. And the Taser instructor asked me if there's any reason why we were having to collect them, because he doesn't know why we have to collect them, because we collect the cartridge, the serial number, we've got all of that information. So for us to do it, what it does is it allows, if there's a private citizen is tased somewhere, that there's no way that the suspect, if there's an altercation, there's no way that the suspect can pick up all those little things. And so we could go back, and it's a piece of evidence that we could gather, and then we could tie that back potentially to a cartridge, to potentially to a person. So they're anti-felon identification devices, I think, is it listed in here?
It's back a few.
No.
It's right in front.
So the question I'm asking really is there any permanent sort of identification that person in particular has been marked with this taser? And it's not beyond...
Oh, does it mark the person themselves?
Yeah, it's
No.
not beyond... It's not
well,
beyond
only the
technology
little...
for us to be able to do that.
Only the little pricks that they sustain on their skin. But no, there's nothing that marks the person. That's purely just little confettis that shoot out.
Okay, so we'll
So what
stop
do we-
at our current section and bring it back.
Okay. Sounds good.
We get the answers to those other questions, and we can move on.
809.6.
Yeah, we'll pick up at 809.6.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Sorry to-
No, it's all right.
Earlier stuff took longer than I anticipated that. But Captain Pancard. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott for his outreach update.
Great. Jeremy, we might have a lot of time to be doing that, because if you wouldn't mind working the keyboard a little bit.
I
So
don't mind.
I just want to direct everybody's attention here. If we can, we're going to get this out to you, and you're reading it back in for the next month. This was something we voted on, we felt was important. We presented to the city council. We wanted 100% of our neighborhood associations to be have some sort of contact with us. First of all, I'd like for you to take a look at this, look at the associations. And if you participated and represented yourself as a police commissioner in either Q&A or whatever it was, we'd like to capture that data that we did meet with that association. And second, if you see up here where there's a blank or a red, yellow area, and you can make those, we only have 4 months left to make our 100% goal.
Oh, I see.
So we need to get out there, and I think as you realize that from today's presentation that we have some things to talk about, and probably some questions from the community as they watch those videos and other things. So the sense of urgency is there.
What do you do when you do this outreach?
We didn't have the community justice study going on when we were in the spring. So I know that Will and Bill and I, we've all met with we just answered questions. There's a lot of associations that members didn't even know we had a police commission.
And they definitely don't know what we do.
And where it's located and how that they can come and speak to us, and also just to hear there was a lot of complaints on various things, and there was questions on others. It was very informative to hear the perspective. When you're on the commission, you tend to, especially the longer you're on the commission, you tend to have these beliefs that you feel from the meetings and your experience. And this is a great opportunity to continue to say, these aren't just my views; these are the community's views, and you can bring those to the table. So it's also, I think it provides a sense of value to you on the council as well when we're out talking to the community.
Does this spreadsheet go farther out where it says somewhere we have the dates of their meetings, like the first Tuesday of every month or the whatever, yada, yada?
Oh, gotcha.
We've got that, and I think I kept that actually.
So I had that in what the most current ones were the last time this was updated, and I can update that again as far as those meetings are concerned.
I would definitely like to go to the Downtown Neighborhood Association one, so I'll look and see if I can find that list, because it just says generally when they have them,
Yeah, and we could get, because I remember that list, so we can get that, and we could have Jeremy send that out too this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I kept that one because of that reason.
And this isn't a vote piece or anything else, so we can communicate through Jeremy. You say, I will be attending this
Sure,
meeting,
yeah, yeah.
you know, on a weekly basis, and that way we all can have visibility of who's attending that.
Right.
I'm not able to attend every meeting, but I've been to Downtown Neighbors and Active Bethel's.
Oh, well, then I don't need to do that one.
That's where I live.
Well, actually, though,
Oh,
when I went, we didn't have
You've already been
this
to downtown?
Yeah.
thing to talk about, so I wouldn't mind going back with now saying, here's what we're doing. So that's really a little bit different, even if we've been.
Mine, it wasn't really like, it was, hey, I'm on the police commission, I'm brand new, I'll be back soon.
And maybe I'll know something then. Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't have to give a presentation, you can just stand up there and introduce yourself and say,
Good
tell me
Pasture
what you
Island
think.
neighborhoods.
You know, you've seen things, you've heard things, and I think that starts the conversation and leads into the facts then.
And I was asking about the cameras at the time.
Should I mark downtown as complete then?
Have you attended it?
You attended it and you told them you were a representative of the
Yeah,
police
I'll go
commission.
back.
If you can provide me with the date, that would be
He said
great.
he's gonna go back.
Yeah, I'll go back and just,
I'll be at the Fairmount and the Lowellville Citizens meetings. And South University Neighborhood Association is dormant. Right now.
We need to capture that then too, Jeremy. It's dormant.
Sorry, which one's dormant?
SUNA, South University Neighborhood.
25.
25, yeah.
This one is dormant. Okay, so I will create a,
Because they're 98% renter occupied.
let's put over here dormant.
They're 98.
Temporarily dormant.
South or west? Oh, okay.
I will
South.
I'll create a category for dormant over here so that we can.
Oh, I'm sorry, West University, no, they're not, I'm sorry, West University.
Oh, West U.
Yeah, they're not, I will be going to that one, too.
Oh, you will?
Yes. Sorry, it's West University, thanks, Marty.
Yeah.
That's,
I went to a meeting there last year.
Yeah, right, they're
Train
strong and
song.
active.
Train
It's
song
the
is
West,
over in the
West
way.
University one.
Oh, boy, I can tell why, since I can hear the train, I'm on the edge of the wit, but train song, I've never
actually-
heard that word.
No,
Used
what
in
about
here.
It's actually
One
West
more down.
University neighborhood.
The one below it.
Oh,
There we go.
I'll attend with you.
thank you.
Bunch of work done.
Dormant.
I'll just go to the regular, whenever those meetings are.
So I'll add a category over here for dormant. So then
Yeah,
we
I
can
just
just,
don't have a.
that'll be a separate color.
Active Bethel citizens I'll also go to. That's up.
I could do Amazon and Southeast Neighbors.
It's gonna be Amazon too.
Thank you.
They may get another announcement too.
Yeah.
And you can correct the spelling of my name later.
Oh, did I? So once you have it in there once, it'll record over.
It's Mr. Allen.
I deserve that.
It's actually two
It's
E's.
E. Okay, was there somebody else who,
Sorry, I'll handle, I can do Amazon and Southeast Neighbors.
okay. Amazon and South.
Second from the top.
And if you would, as you complete those, just send a note as part of the packet so we can all have visibility of who attended what meeting.
Yeah.
What was the other one after Amazon?
Southeast Neighbors.
South.
South.
Towards the bottom there.
Southeast.
26.
Gotcha.
It says complete.
Oh, and-
So it's complete.
Yeah, we did hit that
Oh,
one.
we did that one? Oh, okay. I can do Laurel Hill Valley Citizens.
Yeah, I'll do that too. I'll do it with you. Their next meeting's gonna be coming in November, October. I don't think it's set yet. So I'll do that with them. 'Cause I go to those meetings anyway.
Okay.
Counselor Seth is friendly.
So that,
Yes.
so we had some commitments by Edward, and Edward's no longer with us.
You want to rephrase that?
And we're still not going to do it?
No longer on the commission.
Yeah.
This is better than, because I did at first, because I know he's been
Because
apparently not
for
well,
time
so I don't.
purposes, we can go back and
Sweet.
clean it up.
That's why he's been
Okay.
missing meetings.
It's on there. I'll do friendly.
Oh, no, no, the
Gary.
other.
Gary.
Yeah, Gary.
Yeah.
Who was gonna do friendly?
Mr. Noe.
You can throw me in there too.
Thank you. We'll coordinate then when we get.
I'm gonna, since you're right there underneath that, I'll try to find Good Pasture, because my co-in-law's moving into the Good Pasture Island Neighborhood Association, so maybe I'll look and get her to go with me.
I'll go with you.
To Good Pasture?
Yeah. I'll be down with her.
Are you down there? Okay.
So I'll find that time, and I think I have your email.
Okay, any more?
Maybe not, I don't have everything.
This is good.
Did you change that? The one that's a university, it's called West University.
Mhm. You mean the one that was, oh, no.
Dormant.
West University Neighbors, Woon?
Well, but 29
yeah.
is University
So-
Neighborhood Association.
Yeah,
That was dormant? Is that what-
University
I just
Neighborhood
look over
Association,
this.
I don't think that exists.
Number 29.
Oh, okay, it doesn't exist?
I never heard of it,
Okay.
but that might be an old one.
Is that the one you adjusted from South University Neighbors?
Oh, I do have your
Oh,
email.
no, yeah.
So it means I found it on a city, because the city's got websites of all the
That would
neighborhoods.
be in my ward, and I never heard of it.
Oh, okay, well then I will just get rid of it then? You can get rid of it.
Yeah. And then Bill and I will clean up the rest.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll go with the road.
It's gone.
Jeremy's got that. We'll fill in the rest. and
Okay. You got it.
Send all the rest of the other ones.
So I'm gonna save the changes as is for now.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay,
It's a wrap.
so does anybody want to make a comment, or would you like to just leave?
Let's leave, that's the comment.
All right.
Time to go.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks for working through it.
We hardly ever go over. We're usually under quite a bit, so.
How was
At the
that?
same time, I want to get back into
Thank you.
discussion between now and November. Which is officers back.
We got much to talk about.
How's it going?
Well, I was just getting that word out.
You would, so I don't know that it really.
I think that language is in the USC policy also, is there incapacity
Oh, that's right.
devices.
That's right, you had
Steps up that you can use deadly
complete
force if you feel that you
nutcase
can.
guy.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I was like, you know, it's
Because it's
interesting though, as much as I really hated running a part-time.
Without looking at it, well,
Oh, yeah, no, I do. That's why.
could potentially, but there's a difference between what is, what absolutely can incapacitate you, period, right now, what is a violence. The baton's a violence.
But he's right, I mean, it really, that's always people could give us grief.
That was scary.
Good place to start.
It's, it raises the bar for the acceptability given depending on the circumstances.
And I do get that part, yeah. Okay.
Where it's worse if they're incapacitating devices as opposed to fighting
For you
devices.
guys, or just
Drop it, so I think that's where that, but 809.4.7.
I just thought, anytime that there's force that would
Getting a little germy.
incapacitate me, I guess that's covered under other policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a difference
Relative.
if, when you get tased, if it works.
Yeah.
Nothing you can do.
Yeah.
You're at the mercy of that person,
And,
period.
Got it.
So in order to defend yourself from
My
that,
job now, I'm
that
the
raises the bar, and we acknowledge
Oh,
that.
really? That makes sense.
So I work.
Yeah, and we'll just finish packing through it. Hopefully have more time to make sure that we can talk everything through it. December, do we have a December meeting? We do have a December meeting.
We
Yeah.
got it. We gotta clean up
We have to, we gotta.
Send you out the
Well,
one.
I'm technically not on the commission though, right? I don't get to vote. I don't get to go to community meetings.
So,
Just because you don't get to vote, you don't have to do all the other fun stuff?
So my second comment.
That's not
the
what I
only,
do.
the only meeting that is not scheduled, August is the only month that, unless we have a weather.
That was, 5 years ago.
We've
But it really- I mean,
missed them in the
solar
winter
guys
due
are
to
like,
ice storms and things like that.
Yeah, literally, these
Those will
were.
all come back.
We're like
I mean,
Bill
the
now.
cap and trade stuff.
Yeah. Although it'll be interesting to see. I've actually kind of given more flexibility.
Thanks, Bill. I will always push, so you just have to tell me at some point to shut me up. Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, not till December.
Maybe you can follow how it is to, if you're gonna throw money in that direction.
We got a place to sleep in.
It's interesting to me.